Okay, well, let's get started. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Marianne Lacerte, and I'll be your workshop moderator for today. I'm originally from the Nadlewatan First Nation in northern BC, and I'm very grateful to be joining today from beautiful West Saanich territory, where I've had the privilege of living, working, and raising my family for almost 30 years now. On behalf of the Moosehide campaign, I just want to thank you so much for attending today's event and for signing up to take part in our workshop. I'd like to start by going over a few housekeeping details. So first of all, talking about questions. You're very welcome to ask questions through the chat, and then because we'll be having all participants muted throughout the workshop, and then I will be monitoring the chat, and you're welcome to put your questions into the chat, and we'll do our very best to answer those questions in the time that we have allotted as we're able. If there's any that I'm able to answer directly into the chat, I'll do that. And then as time permits, I can bring some to Wedlidi's attention as well. I also wanted to talk a little bit about internet safety. It's very important for us that all of our participants feel safe and supported through the day, and particularly in this workshop. So we have resources that are available for support if you feel that you need them. And there's a link in the chat about how to access those resources. We'll be having a couple of breakout groups so that you can synthesize your learning through conversation with your peers. And in these breakout groups, we want you to know that you are very free to leave the breakout group at any time that you need to, if you need a break or if you require some additional support. So when you're in the breakout room, you'll see a menu bar usually on the bottom of your screen, or maybe if you're joining from your phone, it might be on the top, and it will say just either leave. There will be an option to leave or leave room. And if you take that option, that will bring you back to the main Zoom room where Wedlidi and I will be holding space for anybody that needs any kind of support. And in the very unlikely event that we have any inappropriate behavior or comments from any of the participants, these participants will be removed by a member of our workshop team. So I think that's it for housekeeping. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions about any of that. And so now I'm thrilled to introduce our facilitator, Wedlidi Speck. Wedlidi is Kwakwaka'wakw as well as Island Salish from the Comox Valley. And we're so grateful to have him lead us in our learning today. Thank you so much, Wedlidi, and welcome.
Thank you, Marianne, and welcome everyone. Glad that you've come to join us today to the workshop, which I've titled Culture, Masculinity, and Storing Our Lives. And so I look forward to sharing information around that and generating some discussion about that. As indicated, I am from the Kwakwaka'wakw, and Nuchanuth and Island Comox. And so I really have enjoyed the connections to those particular cultural groups, and really happy about that. So if we could just jump right into the slides, that would be great. Austin. Great. So I want to begin by really appreciating Marianne and on for joining me today, and want to say that it wouldn't be possible without collaboration and working together to make this all possible for you. I'm thrilled to say that I've known the Lacerte family for many years, and have been involved with the Moosehide campaign since its inception, you know, and I've enjoyed, we'll say, supporting the work. And I do begin, we'll say, by by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Puntledge, Aixin, and Comox people on whose territory that I live, work, and play. Through my maternal grandmother, I am a descendant of all three cultural groups. The Puntledge are the historical owners of the territory. The Aixin moved here between 1830-35, and the Comox moved to the territory in 1850. My connection is to the Aixin tribe, which I am one of 5 hereditary chiefs. And through ancestry DNA and 23andMe, my X2A DNA profile connects me to Kennewick man, known presence on the coast to be 9,000 years. And it's something really significant when you think about a sense of place and belonging and how important that is. I'm really pleased to say that when we look at the tribe that here, translates people of the sun. Next slide, please. One of the important foundations of cultures where I come from, and actually in my conversations with our Indigenous people across the country, is our Indigenous worldview. What I want to say is that Awitnakula, which is a word in Kwakwala, in the Kwakwakwa people, it means to be one with heaven, air, land, sea, and everything in it. It was taught to me by a beautiful woman, the late Katie Adams, a Bumble, we called her. And I often would have her as a mentor over a cup of tea and toast. And one of the traditions were to have toast and jam, and that were some of the profound teachings took place. And it was amazing because as we would sit together, I was transported back into time, and these words or the songs or the stories that I heard landed me in a place where it was totally unfamiliar to me, but it was so welcoming and so calming and beautiful that it really seeded an interest in my heart and in my mind and my very soul around how I wanted to walk in the world. And so I made it my mission to sit with elders and listen to their stories and really just talk about that to learn what it meant and how powerful that was in forming identity, culture, and their sense of connection to the land. And so when we're thinking about our Indigenous people, we believe that all things in nature and the universe are related. From the time of creation, we are one family. Grandfather sun, grandmother moon, uncle stars, aunt clouds, father sky, mother earth, we're one family. Our way of seeing the world is relational. We are not separate, but part of it. And that was a really important part of what Katie was sharing with me, is that, it's a way of being in relationship to everything that is around you. We are not separate from it, we're part of it. And it feeds us and it helps us to grow and gain a sense of strength, a strength that is really powerful. And so when we think about our world, we think about our relations, we acknowledge, we'll say that, that this is a place in which we shape, think, and therefore if we take that as our foundation, it allows us to look at one another in a really special and different kind of way. And so it's really about structuring the mind to be a certain. And as we go along in the presentation, I'll weave that together with other aspects around masculinity. Next slide. It's one of our fundamental beliefs was that in the orders of creation, the second order of creation was the plant world, the plant beings. And so the second order of creation brought these plant beings. They were known as the supernatural ones, the helpers, as they possessed healing qualities. special prayers are said before we harvested. And the important part of that was that each of our areas, no matter where we came from across the country, there was one plant in particular that stood out and that we used it as the core of our cultural development. And for us, the cedar tree was significant and it was really important to us. We built our houses out of it, canoes, we built our masks and our clothing, every aspect of our life was connected to the tree of life. And it was the life force, the very essence that we wore and that we put on our head. Our cedar regalia was on our head because it influenced the way we would think about things. And so it was really important. So we welcomed supernatural beings in today. And to know, would say that as we begin and do our work, they will be very much a part of it. Next slide. The third order of creation was very significant. It was a belief, would say, that as the universe was growing and taking shape and defining itself and becoming the beauty that it was intended to be, that they emerged thunderbirds in heaven, wrens in the air, and grizzly bears in the forest, and the core was a house concept of the myth people at the center. In the ocean were sea monsters or king of the sea, had relationship to all things. And so this world, these four worlds work together in a really special way. And if you happen to be from the other end of the country, whether it's east or central, north or south or west, we have these stories of myth people, these ancient ones. And a lot of our teaching says that the myth world is where ceremony was formed. And the ceremony was in that house that we're looking at the center of this image. And so we went into that house. If we had a secular way about us, it transformed through the doorway to become kaleidoscope-like, where we're relational. And so it was really powerful. So there was a way of moving from one way of thinking to another. And when we were in the house, we were swallowed up by the house, and therefore we lived it. And it kind of reminds me of a poem that Rumi wrote, where he said that out there beyond the notion of right doing and wrong doing is a field. I'll meet you there. And it was the place of consciousness where it was beyond duality, it was beyond hierarchy, it was beyond competition. It was a place in which when we sat, we simply saw the relationships between all living things, how important that was. And we can develop our sense of connectedness in that. It's a beautiful thing. And the image on the door is double-headed serpent, and they saw that the cedar tree behind them, the tree of life, was really important part of how we did things. And so whether you come from a culture that uses tobacco or sage or cedar or sweetgrass, whatever those plants are, they are significant, and we use them in a way that is medicine to us. And our people say that came about from the myth people, and we borrowed it from them. Next slide. So one of the things that we learned is that the myth people, they had a conversation and they talked, and it was time for them to take costumes off and become human. And when they came down from the myth world to the world that we know today, they landed in very special places. And the ancestor that I come from in Comox here, the tribe is called Ayiksen, and the man was called Ipsen. And his name meant sun human form. He married the daughter of the moon, and her name was Quatnach. And we'll talk about that marriage in a minute. But if you look to your left and you'll see the names here, they are names of ancestors. The culture of this particular group, their land was named after them. and that was a really beautiful thing. And so the Aixen land was Aixen, the Sasut land was Sasut, the Puntlich was Puntlich, right? And so it was like your name of your ancestor and your land became part of your identity. For the Kofakiok people, it was really similar to that. There's a beautiful story where it talks about a whale that traveled the land and excuse me, traveled the oceans, and at one point went up to beach and took a costume off to become human. And when this person stood as a human, sent the costume back in a very loving way to the ocean. And he turned around and declared to the world that his name would be Klalis, which is stranded whale, and that his land would be called Klaladi, the place of whales. And it wasn't so much that it was going to be where whales came, but it would be the home of his descendants. And so it was the idea that as a stranded whale, it meant that this is where his civilization would begin. And this would be the place in which he would have children, and those children will connect to that story. Because his house that he built, he put on the door the crest of the whale. And so from that time on, Klaladi became known as the place of whales, but it's also the origin story of Klalis. And so their crest of those people was a whale. And so that's really significant in that when we think about where we come from and we talk about our place, it's really important. Names become really important. Next slide, please. I think we're frozen. As we're getting ready for the slide, I want to just say that Ayuksen is a really important tribe for this area, and so historically they lived in the Campbell River area. Their territory came right down to Point Holmes here in the Comox Valley on Vancouver Island. But the earliest drawing, let's say, of the territory is a village of Chakuten, and it's a place in which it was up on a clay bluff, and there were 11 homes there, and there were 2 principal chiefs. But the idea that these villages, they give us a real strong sense of belonging. And just outside the village on the beach, there's 90 carved stones. And these carved stones we call petroglyphs, but they came about, say, to demonstrate our relationship to the territory and how important it was to be able to tell our stories. They've dated some of these to be about 4,700 years old. And I wanted to show that particular stone because the headpiece of my great uncle is the sun, and the connection to the people of the sun and that place, you know. So belonging, place, and identity were really important. And so when we think about this, is that there was a transformer story, Kamsnos, which translates to be our elder brother, came through the territory, and he went to the ancestor of the Aiksen, and he really loved his qualities, because as a quality of being, this person was really strong in terms of his heart and his spirit and how he was in the world. He was very kind. And so in any case, this teaching that Transformer gave to him is that our people used carving our stories into stone since that time, and how important that is. And there's one story of where the chief would carry a big carved stone into the ceremony and place it down. And this symbolized that he was the next chief in line, and that he was now taking over his father. And in a way of demonstrating that there's cultural continuity and cultural connection. That's a really powerful thing. I also want to say that part of our ancestry is when Iksen started, he went on a canoe And in his canoe, he shot arrows to heaven and made a rope. And he climbed that rope and he went up and through a number of different adventurous things, he ended up marrying the daughter of the moon. And when they came together, they came back to the earth, and on the house became the crest of the sun and the moon together. And we believe, we'll say that that's the beginning points of a culture that was not patrilineal, not matrilineal, but bilateral, and that the masculine and feminine energies were equal, and began to shape, we'll say, how the descendants of the Eichsen would walk in the world, and how they would hold that tradition and become the mentors of that. And we'll talk about that as we go along. And next slide, please. Yeah. So one of the pieces that is really important for us to understand, we'll say, the place in which we get our strength from, is that when we put our crests on the door or crests on the front of the house, as we improved in our use of lumber after we invented lumber mills, we were able to draw the crest on the face of the house as opposed to it being on the door. And so if you look at this, our people believe that the house is the ancestor. And so that was really important. So when we made blankets and dancing regalia, this one here to my right is a blanket that replicates the house. And when we put that blanket around us, we are wrapping our house around us. And that little piece in the middle, just above the bird at the center, where it's blank, is where it goes over your neck and your head. And so when you have the blanket wrapped around you, you become the smoke of the house. And so whatever's in that house is being exhibited in an artful, an artistic kind of way. And so whether we're giving a speech or whether we're dancing or whether we're doing different kinds of ceremony, we are doing that with a house wrapped around us. And so the blankets are significant, and the concept of the house is significant. Because we believe, we'll say, that King of the Sea lives in the house, the salmon people have a house, grizzly bear has a house, Jonaqua, wild woman, has a house in the woods. Every living creature in either of the four worlds have houses that they live in. Up in heaven, the thunderbird has a house. And so when we look at the concept of the house, the universe is a place of houses. And so we can visit these places because there's four rivers, and if we borrow the masks of the King of the Sea, the salmon, as well, we can travel to these places, and we can be in relationship to them. Lots of stories around. But the important part of that is that this is a core teaching that allows us to walk with our house and walk with our blanket. Next slide. What we'd like to do at this point is just to look at the territory that we've covered so far, and really think about that. We have a number of questions, and just take some time. I really like the Indigenous way of learning, and that is to, as we show up, is to really think about where this is all landing in you, and reflecting on it and connecting to it and sharing and working with others around that learning. And so if you can go into breakout rooms and introduce one another and have conversations, answer these questions, and if you can, and it generates additional questions, use the chat line, and we're really glad to expand on the teachings. It would be important to do it that way. And if we've forgotten anything at all, I'm sure Marianne will introduce it or ask me and to clarify points or raise a question or two. And I'm really open to that as well. So I guess I'll ask Ed At this point, if Austin can take us to the next part. Wonderful. I want to just welcome everyone back and really thank you for joining us today and looking at the importance of culture. And one of the things I say is that when we look back at our ancestry and we look at the teachings, the stories and the teachings and the mentorship that we received from our grandparents and aunties and uncles began to really shape a world. It helped to help us as people to navigate through relationships in a really good way. The ancestral teachings talk about the masculine side of the sun and the universe and the feminine side. And when those two came together, they provided us with a basket like nature and a resource for us to use when we were conducting ourselves in developing or creating and developing relationships and celebrating relationships. We took the essence of that and we brought that together, and we practiced a lot in our communities, and the response was either supportive or the ancestors helped correct us in a really respectful, good way. And so it functioned, right? And so we came to a time where our world was turned in a different direction. And we call it contact and conflict and colonization, and we'll talk a bit about that. But what was interesting here is that as you see the image that my cousin Andy Everson put together, is that you had these ships that were sailing to our territory. You know, they didn't realize that when we saw the moon, there was a living being, and that's where a lot of our identity came from, and a lot of our strength came from, and that's the feminine side. That's Grandmother Moon. And so, so when they missed that opportunity, they missed the opportunity to greet us in a really special way. And so, if you can do the next slide, I want to illustrate the difference. And you might have seen these images. They're quite common, we'll say, on the internet. But when we look at the differences between hierarchy and relational practice, is that it's just the way that people are. It doesn't. I'm not going to put any judgment whatsoever, but it's the way that people are. And so when we look at whether humans or men feel that they are dominion over things, or the hierarchy is really important to them, or competition or duality is important. When we look at the other side of that, we see the Indigenous way of relational practice is really being important, in that we aren't necessarily, we don't feel that we're above the creatures of the universe. We're part of it. And it's a different kind of way, right? And so the tension's there. And so with those different perspectives and those different relational practices, it no doubt was going to head into a collision course. Next slide, please. And when we talk about it, you know, colonization comes from a perspective. It comes from a way of seeing the world, and it translates the thinking into a practice. And so the process of colonization is really about settling among the establishing control over Indigenous people of an area. So it's about them coming in and taking a sense of ownership and applying, let's say, that perspective to the world of other people. So there was forced assimilation, cultural disconnect, and it was followed by recruitment to systems of privilege and bias. And that's really what we're talking about in terms of the impact on culture and the impact on masculinity and the impact on femininity. And it really was about manufacturing identity in this case. So you see the image on one side is the same person on the other, and you'd think they weren't the same person, but it's about perspective, right? It's about how things landed. Next slide. So Canada in 1867, as we know, created this Colonial Indian Act, and really the act was aimed the great aim of our legislation has been to do away with the tribal system and assimilate the Indian people in all aspects with the other inhabitants of the Dominion as speedily as they are fit to change. And so when we look at the act had its intention to change. And so we do the next slide. So this translated into the dismantling, we'll say, of tribal systems, but dismantling culture. And so, the ban, the potlatch ban, trials, the confiscation of regalia, including outlawing the sun dance, the powwow ceremonies, the application was countrywide. But in particular, you can imagine, we'll say, that the ceremonies that we had, which were winter ceremonies, and it really helped ground us into our relationship to the world, the mythic world around us. And that was removed. And they also removed summer ceremonies. And so with that, we were left, there was a void, right? And it left our people feeling really weakened by that. And that's really important to understand, that this ceremony, whether it's winter and summer, was so important to us. On the West Coast here, and amongst the Salish, the Chanuth, and the Kwakwaka'wakw people, we had winter names. And we used those names when we did those ceremonies. And at the end of that period, we put them away. And then we took summer names on, and we did summer things. And so we had two distinct worlds, and we navigated through those two worlds because they were intentional and purposeful. And we learned and we grew both in our sense of our masculine and feminine. They were designed to strengthen our understanding of those two dimensions. Next slide. As we know, we'll say residential schools emerged early on, and they were clearly, as demonstrated by the Prime Minister of Canada, that the schools were aimed to kill the Indian and child. And when you look at the picture in the corner of the slide, you see that same transformation. And it was really about introducing a way to these young children that would dismantle their relationship to the culture, but structure the thinking to be more like the dominant culture and really Christian based. Right? The next slide. The other thing that happened early on was the way that the forestry policies were right from the beginning. Sawmills were created, housing was built, cities or landscapes rather transformed into towns and cities. And what they didn't realize, though, is that when you look at the bottom picture, there was loss of resources for our housing, for our food and medicines, which we really feel today. There's just a real amazing disconnect to that. Next slide. And to the point where one of our core spiritual practices was the spruce tree with how we buried our ancestors, and they were really buried close to us. We had a special relationship to life as we had with death, and we weren't afraid of it. I remember my great grandparents' house. Behind the house, there were trees with burial boxes in Alert Bay, and it's just part of how we were. We weren't afraid of it. And, and it was like inevitable to say that we were walking toward death. And as we walked toward death, we weren't afraid of death. It was part of life. Okay. Next slide. And then we'll say, use this as an example, we'll say with the ban of fish weirs in about, I guess it was about 1870s. And what happened in that way was the technology really that really helped our people sustain food supplies was destroyed. And we then were forced, we'll say, to do use nets that would pull the fish in, but for canneries as opposed to feeding our people. And those who understand our, food security would understand that when I talk about the loss of food security. And so we began to see, we'll say, that there was a weakness developed in terms of how we were able to harvest and what we harvested. And it was more of a push to eat what the settler was eating. Next slide. So really, in a really quick way, I don't want to belabor this piece, but I wanted to make sure that I emphasize this piece, that from potlatches to burials, from traditional family systems to residential school, from governance to industry, from technology to fashion, every aspect of Indigenous people's lives went under deconstruction from a policy that has as its aim total assimilation. The impact of colonization has resulted in the decline of spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental well-being. Next slide. And I say this because when I talked about storing our lives, there's something really powerful about the story, right? Stories can lift our spirits or they can kill us, right? They determine the path we take. When we were storied as lazy, dispensable, stupid, dumb, dirty, and drunks, the path led to self-destruction. Those stories were internalized stories of settler racism. And we began to believe those stories. And when we began to believe those stories, we lost connection to what culture was remaining, to our land, to our identity, to our strength. And no surprise, we'll say that when we look at our men and we look at our women, we look at our children during those days, that we were being stripped. As the forest was being stripped, this was all being stripped away from us, and in its place was that lowered self-esteem, and in that place of vulnerability. And those who understand will say, life around will say the idea that we have anger, or we have emotion, we have emotional intelligence. And when people are really vulnerable, oftentimes anger will be a strategy that we use to keep that vulnerability in check. And so it's really important to understand those relationships and the relationships of internalized stories. So when we look at the oppression, we look at the violence that was used to create that changing culture, it doesn't surprise me to say that our relationship to violence and our relationship to conflict and our relationship to a form of sense of loss was huge, right? And so I talk about the power of stories realized when we become aware of whose story we're living. When I make a commitment to become aware of how the story I am living performs, I am making the important step toward my healing. An example being is that as someone who has worked with youth for about 30 years, 20 of that with the John Howard Society, and 9 of that at the Youth Custody Center, and the rest in the community. My approach was oftentimes to use a blend of traditional and modern strategies like narrative therapy. But the idea was to map back where young people, young men in particular, were really struggling. And oftentimes they would be sent to me to deal with their addictions, when in fact, what was happening is that the emotional intelligence that the young person had was really distorted, and the stories were internalized of the culture in which that person was living. For example, what was internalized, or where he was recruited, this one young fella, was that he was sent to me for dealing with alcohol addiction. So when we mapped it back, it really was that he was vulnerable. He was feeling really awkward. He wanted his girlfriend to comfort him. She had commitments, so he got mad at the girlfriend. He verbally abused her, psychologically abused her. Then he went to his father's liquor cabinet. He started drinking liquor. He finished it, and he went down the road and he punched the first guy that he saw. And so as a result of it, he was arrested and then he was sent to me. So the issue here was not alcohol as much as it was about his relationship to living with being responsible for his feelings. And so when he handed it over to his girlfriend, she did the right thing to say, no, that belongs to you. When he went to alcohol, alcohol's alcohol, right? And then when he went to the guy on the street and hit him, he's still trying to hand that responsibility over to somebody. So our work was about how to turn that around, create the dissidence so that the person could live a life where they were responsible for those feelings, and have that sense of personal authority. And really happy to say that when we focused on that, we saw some really remarkable changes, and we saw some changes in the relationship that he had with people around him. It's really open. So there's other complicated stories, but I wanted to give that as an example. So one of the things I say is that our culture is filled with hero journey stories, roadmaps that instill confidence, curiosity, and humility. They teach us how to look at ourselves in relationship to nature, our family, our purpose, and our destiny. I love the words like Tlawayas and Skayuas, strength from our ancestry or our ancestors. They mark the source from which our truth lies. Words like Falayu, you are my reason for living, touch children in ways that strengthen their spirit. These stories generate heart smiles. As authors of our story, we can create life we imagine for ourselves and co-create life with our loved ones. And that's really important to have that kind of that vision and that hope. Next slide. So I wanted to walk us through this part, because it's like we came from a culture not that long ago where we had within the building blocks, we'll say, of a really healthy self-concept, really healthy self-discipline, really healthy self-acceptance, and a really healthy self-responsibility. We had these things, and our elders, our aunties, our uncles, our whole system nurtured that and helped shape it into a human being that would really work. August, one of my favorite stories I tell is our late chief, Sam Weber, in Kinkom Inlet. And what he would do is that he would share his wisdom in this way. He said, when children be bad, we take them in longhouse, tell them story be good, right? And so what he was doing is he was telling us that young people, when the young person acts in a way that isn't congruent with the community, they're disconnected from their story. So you remember when I said we take him in longhouse, tell him story be good? Longhouse is his ancestor, and he needs to come back to learn about where he came from, who his ancestor was, and what strength comes from that story of ancestry and ancestral connection. And when he returned to the community, he was grounded, or she was grounded in that place that was really meaningful, right? I just love that story from Sam Weber. Because what it does, it talks about, we'll say, the possibilities, the opportunities that we have, and I know we'll say that in the years of working with young men, I've been able to see changes when we do this kind of work. It's a really powerful thing. Without knowing where you come from, without having a relationship to your sense of place and belonging, without having a sense of what your gifts are, you're not going to go anywhere that is really constructive. Right? And so in that, we wanted to go back and talk a little bit right now about the connection between culture, colonization, and impact, and just sort of have that conversation with one another. And I know it seems like we're going really fast, but what's important about that is that what's coming in our conversation after this. But it's like this part's, I think, really significant. And so it's have that conversation, and to explore these ideas, and to see if they land with you, or if they're resonating anywhere in your body, and to talk a bit about that.
Thank you so much, Wedlidi. So Austin will just invite you to join another round of breakout rooms, and then we're going to give you about 7 minutes for this conversation. And so just honoring this, that's a shared space, and hopefully everybody who has the opportunity, who would like the opportunity, has a chance to share. And we'll see you back in 7 minutes.
Well, welcome back, everyone, and turning now toward the call to the Moosehead campaign, and in this part I've titled "Stepping Out of the Darkness." And as we move forward, we begin to address some of the key questions, and we can go to the next slide. Yes. So we're working together to stop violence against women and children. And it's really important that as we do so, that we honor the dream and the vision of the Lacerte family and their friends. And as we work together on this, we are creating a space in which we can share with our women and children that is really safe. And it signals our as men that we're stepping in a really good way. And some of us who step in with cultural teachings, it's important to know that we're not all the same. That as we step into this, I come from a bilateral culture, and that's it's different than a matrilineal or a patrilineal culture. That those cultures is important to understand are different than the way that we do things. And so I don't want to say that I know about your cultures, but I do what I invite people to do is to say that when you're in the territory of people, please ask how people prefer to share information about them. It's some good questions, and I think one in particular talks about medicine, and I wanted to speak to that because it's really about, this is medicine, what we're doing, and it's really about how to create a space and to share a space where the voices and our differences can be supported, recognized, and honored, right? And so that's the container I like to create, but I definitely come from a bilateral culture, and so as hereditary chiefs, our ancestors followed a way that our men and women work together, and it was about modeling to one another the masculine and feminine. By itself, we felt that. And our ancestors felt that we needed to be able to learn from one another and to help each other grow, so that we temper a masculine that has a feminine element to it, and the feminine has a masculine element to it. And through that discourse, we are able to say to see the world in a very unique way, special way for us, and that's important. Next slide. Yeah, so one of the things that I'm inviting people to do is really important is be the resistance, right? Be the change you want to see, decolonize, right? And so what's really important about it is for us to do our inventories, is to be able to say that, look, where in me am I colonized? Where in me am I following, we'll say, that left brain approach of being hierarchical, dualistic, and competitive? Where in me would say does that bring disconnect with people, and begin to challenge that, right? It wasn't our way. We had competitions, but we celebrated that together, and we made sure we say that that our influences were about being in relationship as opposed to winning and disconnecting people from us. It was really important. And so in 1914, I put here is that my great-grandfather, great-grandfather were people who worked on resistance. And in 2016, with me and my cousins were working on this resistance. But what they were doing in 1914, they were in real survival around just trying to keep their connections to their ceremonies. And in 2016, our decolonizing work is about doing our ceremonies. It's about demonstrating. I don't need permission from Ottawa to do this. We have the authority as hereditary chiefs, as matriarchs, and as family systems to be able to do ceremony. I'm not asking permission about that. We're following the ways of our ancestors. And you can tell I got a bit of a passion around that. But it's about, believing in yourself and believing in the culture, and making that culture work for us, so that it creates the containers for healing and growth for our people. Next slide. So one of the elements is that in looking at how we do things in the Comox Valley here, they've adopted, a traditional house system and put it into the administration. And the four cultural groups here are on the house, right? And so idea that when people are walking into that house, they know that house belongs to them, belongs to every tribal group here. And that's what we're trying to do, is think about, we'll say, your house. Come back to that place. What is your house? Do you have your crest on your house? Do you have, whether the beautiful teachings of the teepee, or whether it's the teachings of the igloo, or the teachings of the plank house, whatever that is, a mud house, all those houses have a teaching to it. And learning that teaching, so that when we think about the way that we are in the world, we are walking with that house in our heart, within our mind, and within our belly. And that way we say we know where we come from, and we bring where we come from with us when we do this work. Next slide. So one of the things that, this is my son dancing, and he's dancing a killer whale, because we, in Comox, we're the Aixen tribe, but as a clan of that tribe, we're the killer whale clan. And the petroglyph that you see here is the killer whale crest that we have. And so that's the mask that belongs to the family. And so when you continue this and you practice it, it becomes alive. You feel different, right? This is my son dancing, and I just watch him. He dances with such grace, and it brings on such humility, and it's beautiful. And when I see that, this is what culture can do for us, so that when he dances in the world, whether he's working or with his family or with his relationships, he has that crest, he has that dance, and he has that song in his heart. And that's what he brings to his ceremony, which is relationship building. Next slide. And so one of the things when I talk about cultural masculinity, I define it a little different here. The double-headed serpent, which is really important in my family as a symbol, is about on the parameters, they call it the double-headed snake, but is about, we'll say, looking at duality, and at the center of that space is the oneness that we seek. It's that place that I mentioned in Rumi's poem, out there beyond the notion of right doing, wrong doing is a field, I'll meet you there. And that's the place in which when we go into our houses, we transform, and we bring with it, on one side, the wild man and the wild woman. These are the energies that are of the forest, that allow us to dance with what I call it's a real deep psychology, cultural psychology, that allows us to be free, right? And I don't want this to be interpreted as the wild man is a savage man. That came with the settler. The wild man is the life force. It's the energy. The wild woman is the life force. It's the energy. It allows us to be creative. It allows us to come together and dance and bring life to whatever we do. And it's scary because it's strength. It's powerful. It comes from nature. It comes from the life force, which allows all things to grow, right? And so we know, we'll say, that in this act, we find, we'll say, the sun, the moon, the stars, the breath, all these things are working together in this moment. So when I talk about cultural masculinity, is not without talking about the feminine aspect of life. It's impossible to do that. And it may be just my influence around being a bilateral culture, but it's just what I do. And for one of my cousins, this is the dance that I do. And so how I am in the world is about dancing in that space between things. And the chief name that I have is Kamkamkwadi. And what that means is that those energies that come together, the force change. And it's very much the way that I am in the world. But it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing about bringing, rebuilding relationships. And so this is a real powerful thing. And so when we think about, that dance of life, and we think about masculinity, we think about femininity, we think about the sishiov, we think about the relationship to the plant world, we think about the relationship to the mystery. All these things are really important in how we walk in the world. And when we do that, I'm not wearing that mask right now, but I have it in my heart. I have it in my mind. I have it in my belly. And that's a really, really important way to be in the world. And so that's powerful. Next slide. Yeah. So the other part of that, when we practice, I talk about building agility. And I think when we're looking at the kind of relationships that we want in the world, I simply say as we move in this journey, we reduce otherness and the need to change others to look like us. This journey that we are taking is transformational. It starts with individuals. It's about holding the tension or change and healing and hope, right? And I borrowed this image off the internet to symbolize that. It's like we live in a time now where people are beginning to reclaim that place of showing this is who I am and how I want to be in the world. We can be traditional, we can be modern, we can express our gender preference, we can do all the things. And the dance that we dance is this dance, right? And so for us to be inclusive, to be collaborative, to be welcoming, to host each other in a really good way, we need to start. And we need to be able to focus on what story we're living, right? Are we living the settler story? Or are we living the story of our ancestors? And so here's an opportunity for us to step into a place, we'll say, where we can be welcoming, and important. Next slide. So part of our challenge is being curious, open, willing, and humble, right? And so I talk about that. That's my version of the art of hosting, is how to be artful in our hosting. Is ask ourselves when we're doing this work, how am I showing up? How am I showing up to this? Am I curious? Am I open? Am I willing? Am I standing in my humility? In other words, am I looking at this as through the eyes of a child? Am I in that place that I just want to learn, right? I don't want to be the expert here. I just want to learn. Because when we're looking at change, we have a tendency to, from a cultural perspective, we're too entrenched to say that it won't work here, right? I don't see what's in it for me, or I don't get it. Right? And so part of that is that it's our check place around colonization. If we're having these thoughts and this is resonating somewhere, it just might mean that let's step in to do some decolonizing work. Don't be hard on yourself. We've been recruited to these ideas, and we sometimes, in an unknowing way, bought into them. But just check it, like from a cultural place, a personal place, or intellectual place. So if you feel that your cultural way is the way for everybody, and you're trying to colonize us, please stop. If you're looking at, learning about how do we in different cultures, whether it's matrilineal, patrilineal, bilateral, how do we come together and hold space together? Historically, we had a trade language we call Chinook, and it was a language that was bridging, and that allowed us, let's say, to be in good relationship with one another. And that's what we're having to do now, to come up with new ways to do that. Next slide. So for me, around cultural safety, is that we reach a place where you make it safe for me to be me, and I ensure it's safe for you to be you. That means I can show up fully in the way that I am, and so can you. When we anticipate this, wherever we stand, then we have arrived at cultural safety. Next slide. Next slide. We're going to continue on. I'm going to invite people to think about posting questions on the chat line, and we realize that we don't have time to break out, but we have some things we have to get through. It's important, and so we'll move to the next slide. Yeah, and I just want to again to say how heartfelt and how much I love this family and love this movement, and I love the opportunity to stand my humility. Without this work, and the work that I've done for 25 years and 40 years altogether, I guess, in trying to improve things for our people, it's really meaningful. And so I will, with that, Marianne, hand it over to you.
Thank you. Wedlidi, thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here in this space with you, and thank you for your words. Thank you for sharing your teaching so generously. Just so beautiful, and we're really grateful. And thank you to each one of you on behalf of the Moose Hide campaign. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you for what you shared in the small groups, and thank you for the spirit that you're bringing to this day to create this space of connectivity.